Hello, my friends, and welcome to a brand new episode, the 199th episode of the Discourse in Magic podcast. My name is Jonah Babbins, and in this episode, we sit down with Nathan Kranzo. Now, if you don't know who Nate is, this is going to blow your mind. He is one of the most creative magicians around. His lectures tend to blow people's minds. His performances tend to not only blow people's minds, but make them laugh their asses off. He does magic with props that most magicians don't. He does magic using ideas that no one has ever heard of, and he's a real creative and hilarious magician. And in this episode, we get into just that, how he does it and how you can do it too. I had a lot of fun, and I know you're going to enjoy it. Here it is, a wonderful episode with the always creative Nathan Kranzo. Hello, friends, and welcome to a brand new episode of Discourse in Magic. My name is Jonah Babbins, and we are here with the one and only Nathan Kranzo. Nathan, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing well. I'm super excited to chat with you. This has been a long time coming. You know, we've hung out, when I was a kid up at Magic Camp. We've jammed at conventions. We've spent some time together, and I'm super excited to get into this with you and talk magic and talk creativity and get into some of the finer points of the world of magic right now.
Well, I'm honored to have been asked to do it. Thanks so much for being patient with me.
Let's start at the very beginning. How did you get started in magic?
I had like a magic kit when I was a kid, like, a lot of people do, but I didn't really take to it. But one thing that I do remember being interested in was there was like a pretty cool like drawer box, just a little box that you could put a handkerchief in and then close it and then open it back up and it would be empty, or vice versa. But I ended up just like putting firecrackers in it and like lighting. And the whole thing just ended up in my sandbox being destroyed by firecrackers.
That's awesome.
I wasn't quite ready for it emotionally. I wasn't quite at that advanced age yet. But I guess a little bit later, I was really influenced greatly by my grandpa. And I didn't kind of really know that or wasn't aware of that until later, because he wasn't a magician, but he was a jokester. He was like the ultimate prankster. He had like, if you were to go into a magic shop, they always have that infamous wall of fake snot and fake smoke and fake vomit and all that stuff. He owned like every one of those. And, as a kid, you don't know about that stuff, and I didn't know about any of that stuff. And so he kind of introduced me to my first like envelope of rattlesnake eggs. Yeah, still to this day, show that to any 5-year-old and you'll make them crap their pants.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great bit.
It really is. And now that I'm saying that out loud, I think, wow, that's a great moment for like card to envelope.
Yeah. And it's
funny.
Open
the envelope.
I was just going to say, it's funny, it's funny you bring that up, because I think I'm super excited to chat with you about creativity and how those ideas come together. So to see that kind of happen to you live right now in the first minute and a half of recording is a good taste into what we're getting into.
That's definitely one way of just like saying things out loud.
Just brute force.
Kind of like, just throwing things at the wall and see what sticks, But yeah, he was like this ultimate prankster. And so that wasn't, like I said, it wasn't really magic, but it kind of like instilled in me the love for the joke or the prank, and he also loved to scare the crap out of people. He would have like, a mask on and like hide behind the corner for like 20 minutes just to scare all the kids, But later on, I don't know exact age, I want to say like maybe around 15, 14, I ended up seeing an actual magician. Mm-hmm. And of course I had seen like David Copperfield and stuff like that on TV before, but I'd never seen anything live. And we had like I live in kind of a smaller suburb area, a small town, and every summer there's like a little carnival that comes to town, like a lot of little cities in the U.S. There's like a little fair for like 3 days, and they just come to town and everybody rides the rides and buys all of the cotton candy and then they leave. But this particular carnival, they had a beer tent set up kind of separate from the carnival stuff, and you could go in there and there was like a band playing and there were obviously, people drinking, but there was a separate table off to the side where there was, there just happened to be like the local IBM group was there doing magic, but they were more than just doing magic. They were trying to like recruit people to come to the club, which I think is cool. Looking back, that was like a great idea. I don't know if they should have been in the beer tent, but I honestly should not have been in the beer tent myself, but
two people meeting, both not supposed to be in the beer tent.
Yeah. There was music and people dancing. It just seemed like an interesting place to be. So there was a guy I think when I walked up, there was a guy doing an escape, and I was kind of like, this is interesting, but they must just be trick handcuffs. That was my first thought, at like 14 or whatever. But then he walked away after his little bit, and the next guy stepped up to the table, and it was a guy named Chris, who ended up being a really good influence to me, and he did a billiard ball routine, and that was it. That was what really got me, because it was the first really good sleight of hand that I had ever seen. And he did a really good billiard ball routine. I couldn't see any of the steals. I didn't know anything about half balls or anything like that. So it just kicked my ass completely. And he even did which I think is like right out of the Mark Wilson Course of Magic. He did the bit where you kind of give a false explanation. I've got a sleeve, I've got a tube running up this sleeve, goes across, and I believed it. I was like, where do you get this tube?
The tubes, yeah.
I'm like, this is amazing. So it really fooled me badly. And then of course they had like this little flyer, and they're like, yeah, we meet once a month and take this home. And I kind of was like, I was just like a kid, so I didn't really think much about it. I folded it up and took it home and put it in my little junk drawer. And then it was quite a long time later, like maybe almost a year later, a friend of mine in an English class showed me a card trick. And I was like, oh, wow, this is awesome. I was like, I know a card trick. And then I showed him one. And then so, like the next day he would come back. And then I was like, wow, where's he, getting this information? So then I went to the library. I was like, hey, do you have any books on card tricks? And they had like 2 of them. I don't even remember what it was. I think it was probably either a Walter Gibson or like a Fulmes, like a general public type thing. And so I just quickly learned like a key card thing, and I came back and smoked him with the key card. So it was like this battle of like super amateur card guys.
Right.
And that, we kind of found another buddy of ours who was like interested too. And the next thing I know, like he had somehow learned how to do a back palm. And so he was doing like, card productions, and that I was like, wow, that was amazing. And then we found, or I kind of remembered, I was like, hey, I saw these magicians, they gave me this paper, and I went and dug up my junk drawer. And it was kind of serendipitous because I looked and like they were meeting that day. It was like they meet the like first Wednesday of the month, and it was the first Wednesday of the month. I was like, you guys, we should go tonight. And then we went, and now it's been a lifelong sickness.
It's awesome that, a magic club like IBM was kind of that welcoming point for you. You did the experience on your own, and then it was like, oh yeah, I have a flyer. And it was a great welcoming environment. And, you could go with a bunch of young people your age and be a part of learning magic and being a part of a club. Like the beginning of your story is one I've heard before, but, that part is, I think, unique.
Yeah, I think the clubs are so important. The clubs get a lot of things wrong, unfortunately, just because they're run by humans. That tends to happen. But there's also like this kind of, there seems to be a natural old guardness to it. It's just, for whatever reason, it's always like the older guys. And so I can see how that can be pretty unwelcoming to like a 12-year-old that wants to go to a magic club, and then they're like left their mom's like, why would I want to leave you here with all these old guys? It's pretty creepy. And of course they can't relate to you, with, socially, so they maybe can relate to you magic wise, but then you get into the problem where a lot of these guys don't want to practice. They just want to come and talk about how good they used to be or whatever. But I still have a local club that's really good. They're very active, and they do some cool things to try to recruit people. The most important thing they do is they do shows at like the local high schools and stuff. So they kind of are like involved. So like
plugged in.
Yeah, there's like 15-year-olds that are like, oh, that's super cool, and that's the other thing is they get to see that magic can be cool. Where sometimes it can backfire if you go to a magic club. You're like, oh wow.
This is what magic is?
Cool.
Like, if I put all my time and effort, I'm going to be at the basement of a church? What?
Do I have to be socially inept?
Yeah, exactly.
And so if there is an actual guy who is like socially aware of himself and kind of like well-adjusted and has some chops, like he'll stick out like a shining bright star. And that's kind of what happened to me. There was a guy like that at my local club who I had just seen like self-working stuff, kind of, I'd seen that billiard ball routine. And I saw some guy do a French drop, but that was about it. But then I saw this guy like walk in and he basically did like, Daryl's ambitious card routine, like verbatim, which is a lot of stuff. There's passes and top changes and all kinds of stuff. And I didn't know what he was doing, but I knew he was doing something that was beyond my grasp. I could tell that there was like
stuff going on.
There was some amazing skill,
Yeah.
And then when I latched onto him, he at first was just like, stay away from me, kid. And I was very persistent. And then he kind of realized that, okay, well, he really does want to know. He does want to learn, And then I got really lucky because he happened to live in my town, because I had to go like, half hour away to go to the meeting, but he happened to be in the same town as me. So he was just like, a minute and a half from my house. And when I went to meet with him, I was really blown away because it was like I went into an actual library. I was like, it was the first time I had seen that there was not only just physical practice, but there was a lot of knowledge that this guy had that he had learned. And so I was really lucky to, at a very young age, realize that there was, a lot of importance to, I knew there was some direct connection to all these books and all of his chops, not to take away the fact that he probably practiced a lot and had a little bit of natural ability with his dexterity, but he was, still to this day, one of the best sleight of hand guys I've ever seen in my life, and had one of the best libraries I'd ever seen. So that,
Who is it?
His name is Jim Pavlika, and he's not really well known. He published a couple of things in Steve Beam's Trapdoor back in the day, and he actually released a trick that was called I'm With the Band, which is really cool, where you stretch a rubber band out, and then you apparently stop time, and you let go of the rubber band, and it stays stretched, and then you snap your fingers, and it kind of goes back to normal, and then you can hand it out. And then a few years later, Matthew Bish published a handling that was very similar with a lady's hairband, where you could stretch it out and then let go, and it would stay stretched and snap your fingers. Really, really cool idea.
One thing that's interesting about sort of the journey so far is like a young person discovering where it is that magic lives, like what it means, like where magic information and where this kind of stuff is stored. And you start and you're like, I learned it from a guy at school, and then it's like, oh, maybe it's in the library, and you're like, oh, there are books in the library, and then maybe there's a club, and oh, this is what it is, and oh, books, this is where the magic, you know what I mean? Like kind of learning like where knowledge is, where you can go reliably to learn, and where the like quote unquote right way or best way or to start learning is.
Yeah, for sure. It kind of opened up this like treasure hunt for me, which even to this day, like I love trying to find out information. I love researching. I'm like, if there's some new thing, like the other day, there was a self-lighting match trick that I was really interested in. Just the idea of, there's like an old thing where you toss the matchbox into the air and then it strikes the match as you like hold the match out, like a juggling thing, And I was like, wow, that's a really great, thing. And so I was like, I just went on Alexander and just typed in, match lights itself, or, I was doing like keyword searches, and that was just like this rabbit hole of like days. That's like my happy place. I really get off on being able to like, not only find something new, but maybe discover something that, was forgotten. Or what happens more often than not is, along that way in that journey, I'll find something else that's really interesting, and then that will inspire me to be creative and maybe create something, or at the very least, just find some really cool information that's been buried for a long time that nobody's been looking at.
Let's move forward on this journey about where the creativity comes from, because like you said, a lot of these things are, you learn a trick from someone, you read it out of a book, you do, someone literally doing Daryl's routine verbatim, going and finding someone who's got a lot of books. A lot of this has to do with study and research, but not so much creativity. So talk to me about where that came from, where the kind of oomph to go make something or do something or do something never been done before came from.
Jimmy Pavlika, who was kind of like my mentor early on, he was a really creative guy as well, which once again, it was kind of something clicked in my head. It's like, wow, maybe reading all of those books will help you be creative, because you have this giant pool to dip into. You're just constantly cross-referencing tons of information every time you think of something. If you think of a bubblegum trick and you've read 17 bubblegum tricks, that can certainly help you be creative, So one thing that I think helped me early on a lot was I started being creative instantly. Like as soon as I learned a couple of sleights and a couple of techniques, I just started coming up with my own stuff, mainly because I knew no better. So I didn't have information. So I was just kind of like, what do I do? I need to pretend like I'm putting this here. And so I just kind of made stuff up. And I also, nobody told me I couldn't, for as silly as that sounds. You know?
Right.
I think a lot of times, and most importantly myself, I didn't tell myself, hey, what are you doing coming up with magic tricks? Who the hell are you? What are you know, I just was just naive enough to think, oh, I can just come up with my own things. That's what these other guys did.
Right.
You know, there's thousands of...
They wrote books about it. Maybe we'll write a book.
Yeah, I remember like one of the first things I came up with was actually pretty good. I just had this idea of doing like a coin matrix routine. And then I had a gimmick I made where it was a card with 5 coins glued to the back of it, because I wanted to do like at the end, I wanted to like pull this one card slowly away, and then there would be a pile of coins sitting on the other card. Obviously, it was kind of hard to load those coins in there, so it was just really easy to load the coins if they were all glued to the card, because it was just a pile of change glued to the card. But I wanted to be able to show them real at the end, so I would do the production and then kind of relax and just steal the coins from my pocket, and then in the action of turning the card over, I would just let the coins fall out of my hand. And I came up with that like within the first week of me, you know, playing around with magic. And it's still something to this day where I'm like, you know, it's kind of interesting. If you had a pile of sugar on the card, you could do the same thing. You could just kind of like do this interest. So, and I think that's not nothing brilliant or anything like that, but that was enough that when I went to the magic club and showed the guys, they were like, whoa, like who showed you that? And I was like, oh, I just thought of it. And they're like, really? So that like, given the good feedback was also very important and helpful, because if they would have been like, oh, that's stupid, why are you coming up with your own stuff? You're 14, you shouldn't do that, you know? But they were just like, dude, this is cool. You know, they were like, you should keep doing stuff, but also make sure you read this book by Bobo, you know? And then of course I would read that and I would be like, it's kind of, you know, antiquated in a way. It was written so long ago and it's not very, it's not written to be entertaining, you know? So it's just kind of very bare bones. And then not long after that, I got a Paul Harris book, and that just kind of broke my brain to see the contrast of, wow, you can really just be goofy when you talk about magic and your descriptions, and you can just be completely outside the box and silly, and it doesn't have to make any sense in this world, you know?
I want to come back to creativity, but let's talk a little bit more about the journey of becoming a magician and becoming a professional. When did that sort of come on your radar?
It was just something I liked for a long time. It was kind of like one of those things where people didn't really know about it until I was almost like kind of getting ready to graduate. I just really showed my like one friend, like we would just trade tricks. And I was a pretty shy, introverted person. That definitely helped me kind of break out, because I was at the, you know, about, you know, 16, 17, you're at that age where you start to go to like high school parties. And at the age of 43, sometimes I just don't know what to do around people, you know? I'm like, well, what do we do now? What do we talk about? That's why magic has always been such a, you know, I hate to use the word crutch, but, you know, just something to lean in on. If you don't know what to do or say, just pull out a deck of cards and that will fill in the void, you know? But it was even more so at this time, because I would go to these parties and I was kind of shy and didn't really have much to say. So I didn't really have anything to offer. But once I vanished somebody's cigarette, it was the end of it. You know, everybody was like, you know, like, go see Nathan, he does magic. So people would just like find me and like want me to bring me into this room or invite me to this party. So I became kind of like the party favor, you know, and that helped me out a lot. And then I graduated from high school and I ended up going to college in Pittsburgh. I wanted to go to the Art Institute of Pittsburgh because I was interested in special effects, specifically like makeup effects and like, you know, anything that has to do with movie making and just making someone old or making someone look like they got shot in the face, you know, anything like that. And through my research, I found that it was pretty much, you know, the top school for that was the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, because they had instructors like Jerry Gergely and Tom Savini, who are like famous, you know, effects guys that were, you know, instructors at that school. So on the actual trip to check out the school, my thing at that time was like, if I go to a new city, I have to look for a magic shop. So that was the first thing I did when I went to Pittsburgh, was like, I think they have a magic shop here. I've heard about it. And so I went there, and then that was like, you know, it was the first real cool magic shop I'd ever went to. I'd been to like, you know, little kiosks and malls and things like that. But this was like a magic shop with like books and tons of props. and just like, old magicians' pictures on the walls of people that had lectured there and stuff. And it was just like really cool. That was like partly why it sealed the deal for me wanting to go to that school. I was like, oh, I'm going to work at this magic shop. And I did. I worked at that magic shop, and that kind of changed it for me because I just realized, wow, this is really what I want to do.
So while you were in school, you worked there?
Yeah, I worked at the Cuckoo's Nest, which actually just recently closed, unfortunately. But if anybody's listening, they still have stock. You can still go to thecuckoosnest.com and you can still purchase from them. The actual storefront closed. But yeah, I worked there, and I love Linda, the owner, and Tom. He recently passed away. And some guys like Mike Super. I don't know if you've heard of Mike Super. He did the college market for a long time. He actually won. We had this show a few years ago called The Phenomena, where it was like people that would like go on, and Chris Angel and Uri Geller would judge you. I don't know if you remember that show, but he won that show. So he kind of got famous from that. But he was one of the demonstrators that worked there. And there's a few other guys that worked there. Like Paul Gertner would come in, so I got to I got exposed to the real magic world, and I was like, wow, this is what I want to do. So I pretty much, and I also got really lucky because I was a broke ass college kid, and I just got really lucky. And there was like this big ordeal at the magic shop. There was two guys at each other's throats. So one guy got fired, and it was like perfect. I came in town, and I was like, hey, and they're like,
I'm a magician.
Oh, this new kid,
as their work. Yeah.
Yeah. They're like, yeah, this guy just got fired yesterday. And so it was like another serendipitous thing, but my point was like, I didn't have any money to buy anything. And all of a sudden I had like every magic book that was important in front of me that I could read for free. So I just sat there and read all day and played with all the tricks, learned all the tricks. That was kind of like a baptism by fire because I wasn't really that good at sleight of hand. I just loved magic. And if you didn't learn how to demonstrate the tricks, you couldn't work there because they had a ton of traffic. It was a really busy like foot traffic area of Pittsburgh where there was like lots of bars and restaurants. So people, like on a Saturday, there would be hundreds of people that would come through there. So yeah, I basically just kind of had to make it or break it. And luckily he was good enough to skate by there for a while, but then I actually started to get better and actually build some chops. I got really lucky. Some of the guys there would like toss me gigs. So some of the first gigs I did were from there. Like there was a couple of guys that had like a ton of restaurants that they did regularly. So they would ask me to fill in. So those were some of the first gigs I did was filling in for restaurants there. And then, I'll never forget the day where I went in to tell my, parents what I wanted to do. And they were just like, oh no. I finished school and basically just, my grandma had sent me a note and she was like, hey, they're looking for street performers. She lived in a really nice like resort town in northern Michigan. And during the summer they would have like street performers because there's so many people walking around. There's all these little shops and things like that. It's a little harbor town. So there's just tons of people sailing and there's just lots of people. So yeah, long story short, I went and I auditioned. It was like the Chamber of Commerce that you had to like audition for. They basically just wanted to make sure that you weren't a creep, and I was just super green, I had I had learned that billiard ball routine that has influenced me. I went and got the Mark Wilson's book and I had learned that billiard ball routine. I had learned David Williamson's ring and rope routine. I had I think I had card to mouth, and that was like my wheelhouse, that was my repertoire. And but it was actually a pretty good, those are three really good tricks, especially if you're doing street stuff, those will definitely get people to stop. And so, but the problem was when I walked in, I was waiting to do my spot. And the guy before me was this guy named Tommy Tropic, who had been performing on the streets for like 20 years. And I got to see like somebody that was actually really talented. And so I got so nervous. I was just like, oh my God, this guy is so amazing. And then they're like, and now who's next? And I'm just like so nervous. But the good news is I actually fooled them, even though I didn't have, because he's just like all energy. He's a ball of energy. He's shouting and yelling. He's got a million lines that he's perfected over 20 years. And I had none of it. I had no presentation. I was just maybe a little cute, and I had the ability to do the sleight of hand. So they were fooled. And actually everybody there was fooled. So they were like, wow, we didn't really have any clue how you did the ball stuff and blah, blah, blah. So I skated in by the skin of my teeth.
We think we understand the stuff that's important to people, and sometimes we have no idea. Like, sometimes it's the entertainment, sometimes it's the fooling, sometimes it's really easy to disqualify ourselves when we should just let other people disqualify us if need be.
I mean, at the end of the day, I think if you are really in love with what you're doing, that will show in a way that will be empathetic to somebody, And I think that's the most important thing. I think they saw that in me. They're like, wow, this kid's really just like an 18-year-old kid that wants to do magic, and he's probably just starting out, and wow, look at him, he's trying hard, And I think that they saw that in me. And I think the other performers saw that in me too, so they kind of took me under their wing, and that was really awesome because I got to see how to create a pitch and how to stop a crowd. And I had no clue. So they were very giving to me to the point where they would actually just give me a crowd. They would start a crowd and just hand it over to me because they knew I couldn't do it. It was so loving what they did. Crazy Richard was this one guy. He was like a juggler, and I think he's still around. Crazy Richard and Tommy Tropic. And then there was another guy that like just played the saxophone. And there was another lady that played guitar and sang, and me. And we just kind of each had our own corner, and we entertained that whole summer. And that was like a amazing learning experience because my first real like consistent magic gig was the street, and that's like the hardest thing you could possibly do. Either kids shows or the street, in my opinion, are the two most difficult things to kind of not really necessarily to do, because you can get lucky sometimes. The first few kids shows I just got really lucky and they were like well behaved, but then I had a kid riot. I literally had kids like I'll never forget it. I did a kids show, and it was a pirate theme. So all these little bastards had swords. And of course, I didn't think anything of it. I'm just like, oh, cool theme, cool idea. So like now I know all the things that went wrong because I'm, experienced. But like looking back, there was like a lot of things. First of all, they had like one of the biggest mistakes is like, and I mean, you can get away with this, but I never liked this, is when they separate all the kids from the parents, because automatically the kids are going to act like crazy nutsos. Yeah. If they're sitting with their parents, it's a completely different vibe. So I would have done that differently. They all had their swords still. I would have made them take away their swords before they come and enjoy the magic show. And then the other thing that I did to kind of cause the riot is I was doing the routine by Tom Burgoon, which is really funny, called Timmy Toilet Paper. It's basically just a funny routine with a torn and restore piece of paper, but he draws like eyes on the toilet paper to make it look like there's a mouth, and it kind of like talks. And it's kind of like just a funny visual thing. But at the end of the routine, I threw the toilet paper out into the audience, and they reacted like it was crack to crack-starved rats. And they just started attacking the paper and fighting over it and tearing. They were like literally like ripping each other apart over a piece of toilet paper. And like that's the number one. If you're a kid performer, you don't throw anything out into the kids' audience because they'll tear each other apart fighting over it because they all want whatever it is. So yeah, I learned a lot that day because it literally got to the point where I had to say, yeah, I guess if it was my kids, I wouldn't want to get up and help out either because I'd be embarrassed. I basically just shamed all the parents and just did. I had about 20 more minutes I was supposed to do, but I just did the last trick and walked.
Sometimes you gotta just do the last trick and walk off, especially when you have a pirate kid riot. not much you can do to salvage that. That's awesome.
I've heard stories about other kid riots because it is like that, like mob mentality is definitely present with kid shows.
I hear a lot of backstories in magic, and many people get one of those. They get, I worked with a mentor, or I worked in a magic shop, or I got to do street performing, and you got all of them. So it seems like you got a really great welcoming into the world of magic. Things like being a demonstrator at a store is a pretty quick way to realizing the difference between entertaining and not entertaining. And same thing of doing magic on the street.
I was just going to say, I got so lucky with all those things because you're right. Looking back now, those are the things that will really make you, it's all about flight time. It really is. It's just about the amount of time you spend doing the thing. That's why there's comedians that will drive across the country for no money. They just want that experience. And I think that a lot of times, for whatever reason, I don't know why, magicians don't get that. They focus on the other things. And I'm the first person that will say, sleight of hand is very important. You have to have good technique, but just as important if not more, is the ability to be able to present the idea and tell a story in an entertaining way.
You mentioned earlier about some magicians are busy trying to put the card in different unique angles in the deck, and then someone comes in with a Svengali deck and entertains everybody, and blows everyone's mind, and it's fun and awesome and crazy. And we're just sitting there with that, with 4 cards in some weird palm going, well, what am I doing? Like, what's going on here? So talk to me about that. Talk to me about, entertainment and Magic, and how you kind of set your priorities, or how you make sure that that's always the focus of what's going on.
I think when I was younger, I literally saw that happen. I saw some guys working on really hard sleight of hand stuff and trying to impress people. And then I saw a guy walk in with the invisible deck and just blew everybody away. And that was a really eye-opening moment, because not only did it teach me that, well, the method doesn't matter as long as they don't know what it is.
Right.
That was a really important moment. And it also taught me that, well, if someone's got performing chops, they're going to destroy anybody that has technical chops, because it doesn't really matter to a lay audience. It really doesn't, And I'm sure there are people that are interested in dexterity and people that want to know how to cheat at poker and things like that. But we're not talking about that. There's just the idea of walking into the room and being able to own it. And I think the other thing was that was the first time I had seen an entertainer that had spent a lot of time in front of an audience. This was an old guy from the club that, there's just something about a guy or a girl that's just understanding the timing, the beats and the things like that. Because really any moment can be a hilarious moment if you understand timing. There are so many times where I've seen performers get an amazing laugh out of something that I would never thought would get a laugh, just because they understand the timing, or they waited an extra beat, or they just gave a little bit longer stare. People that just understand the timing, I think, are the people that have such an edge when it comes to performing. And I think that is something that you can't really get unless you do it a lot, or you just have it. There are just definitely people that are born with it, just like music. There are people that just have that rhythm and that timing that's just natural. And I think that's very true with performing, and especially comedy, because comedy is so much about the beats and the timing.
I was just going to say, what's so interesting is that you're a creator. You've created such out-of-the-box stuff in terms of Magic itself, but we're talking right now in terms of laughs and comedy and jokes and bits and moments like that, which isn't separate from Magic, but it's not exactly the oohs and ahs of a trick being fooling. Where's comedy playing a role, and is it the most important thing? Is the laughs and the entertainment, and Magic is second? How do you feel about it? How do you think about it?
Yeah, it's funny because there's definitely room for everything. There's definitely a lot of guys that don't do any comedy, and I still love them, and they do beautiful magic that will move you. Especially I just was in Spain, and that's even more. I can't understand what they're saying. So. But I can be moved by their performance and just the energy that they bring to it and their passion. So I certainly don't think that this is the only way. I just have found that for me, it's the thing that really works, because I personally like to make people laugh. So it brings me joy, to bring other people joy. So it's kind of this great circle that just keeps going. It's the energy goes back and forth. I'm giving you the joy, you're laughing, you're giving me joy. And that's one of the most important things when you're performing is the energy of the audience, because if the audience is tired, it's going to be really, really very difficult. But if you've got a guy that just killed before you and he's got the audience all riled up, that's the best thing in the world, to just walk out there and keep that energy going and see if you can push it even higher up into the air. Let's see if we can take this to the top, and see how far we can go, and sometimes you might have to shift gears. Maybe there's been 3 guys on before you and they all killed for 40 minutes. It's maybe you need to kind of bring it down a little bit, and you can kind of use that. Yeah, you can use that to your advantage, because they've built that up for you, and they'll just slow it down a little bit, shift gears, and then bring them back up again to see how long it takes to really pull them up again. Not necessarily as a challenge, but just, I think theatrically it's a little bit more enjoyable if you can have these kind of peaks and valleys. And physically, it's difficult to be laughing for that long. I've been to comedy clubs where I've literally been, as they say, in pain from laughing. I think that it's a way for me to connect really easily with people, because I've found sometimes you can get kind of, all these preconceived notions about magic, but nobody has those about funny. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, I knew a funny guy once. He made me. Yeah, nobody's got really. Most people don't have bad feelings about funny. That maybe there could be a rare instance where somebody got chewed out by a comedian on stage, but that's very rare. And if it is, it's probably somebody that deserved it.
It was their fault.
You know, yeah, if they're heckling or something like that. But you know, there's just, I think so much of me wants to just be a jokester. You know, that I could probably just do that and not do the magic. But I love this is a really unique thing to be able to share with somebody. This is a performance art, this idea of a comedian that is also a magician, that is almost unfollowable. If you do really good magic and you're really funny, it is so hard to follow that.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you don't even have any props, if you're just a funny guy that's got, you know, funny lines and a piece of rope like Matt King, you know, or somebody like Graham Jolly, or, you know, that can just walk out on stage with a nail writer and make people cry laughing. You know, I think that's such an amazing thing. And it's kind of a lost thing too, you know, where it's, I guess not lost as much as it's a really, you can't go to school for it. You know what I mean? But you can't go to Harvard and take that class. So it's just one of those things where I think for me, I always tell people when they ask me like, well, what's your show like? What do you do? I always tell people like, well, even if you didn't like magic, you'd probably like my show because it's funny.
Is there something that you search for when you're creating or when you're looking for effects or presentations or whatever to help you really get into that? Like, the thing that comes to mind for me is, you know, jokes per minute, laughs per minute, you know, like whipping them right up. But is there anything that comes to mind, or that you use any criteria to help you pick or design your effects to play with that?
I think about like what Billy McComb would say. He has some really good advice for this type of stuff. One of the things that he would do is he would combine two things. Like he would do, and this is an extension of what Matt King does now. He would do Matt King's routine with the card to cereal box and the thumb tie. You know, that was essentially Billy McComb's routine. He would do the thumb tie combined with the card to wallet. So he just switched out the wallet for a card box or a cereal box, which is a great idea. I'm not taking away. It's a brilliant idea. But yeah, I mean, I love this idea of, you know, you can kind of create a funny situation if you can combine two things. And what I think Billy was really trying to get at is when you create a funny interaction or audience involvement, that's where you can really stumble upon comedy gold. It's seeing Mac King on stage with the girl who wrote the card on the back of the card instead of the face, you know, and knowing that that's not an accident, and understanding that that's a brilliant thing that he maybe had happened by accident once, but he realized how funny it was. And now he makes sure that's in, and that's true with so much comedy and so much great bits. Is like, I can't tell you how many times somebody said a line and I'm like, oh, I'm using that. It was just somebody in the audience that just blurted something out. Everybody laughed, and I'm like, thanks, man. Can I use that? Or things, you know, sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes it's just something that you say in the moment.
Just falls out of your mouth and you realize that, oh man, was that good?
Yeah, and that works more often than not. You write better in the moment than if you actually sit down to think to write, because your body and your brain, everything is on a different level. Your heart rate is different. You're breathing differently. You have all this energy from being up on stage. So your body is actually prepared to be quicker and be, you know, quicker with the snaps and the comebacks. So that's why oftentimes you see comedians performers have the most amazing quick-witted things that are just like, how could he have thought of that so quickly? It's because you're almost being helped in the situation, you know, by your body physically. So yeah, I think that's why it's so important to videotape and audio retape every single thing you do, because I've forgotten more lines than I have written, for sure. You know,
that's a lesson that I learned is, you know, sometimes it comes from the audience, sometimes it comes from you, and you have to be open to where they might come from. It could come from anywhere. One thing about comedy magic that I learned is that it is fucking hard. And what I mean by that is, I think in a way you can read a trick in a magic book and work on it in your room and then go show someone and they can like it and enjoy themselves and clap, and you get better and you write a better script and all of that with time. But it's not the same with 5 minutes of jokes and bits and a trick. That is a living, breathing animal that comes after tens and hundreds of performances. So one challenge that I had is where I go to fail, where I go to say all those jokes that don't get picked up by me and all those lines that I say that aren't actually funny to end up with the one that is funny. So we have in Toronto a great show. It is weekly. It's now monthly. The newest trick in the book, open mic night for magic. Where do you go if you've got new material or new jokes or new bits that you want to just get out there in maybe a low risk environment?
I'm lucky enough now in my career where I'm established enough. I have a little bit of confidence about, I feel like I know if something's going to be good, so I don't really feel like I'm ever going to completely fall flat on my face with something, unless something happens accidentally and I burn the $100 bill or something.
Right.
But even then, I feel like I have enough experience where I could laugh it off. I know how to self-deprecate and make fun of myself and laugh off almost anything, So having said that, what I usually do now is I just throw that thing into my already established show. Like if I want to work on a new piece, say it's 4 minutes or something like that, I'll just throw that into my already established show. So at the very least, they have tricks that work and things that were really obviously well rehearsed and funny. Because at the end of the day, like I said, I know that the trick will work. I just don't know where all the beats are yet because I haven't done it. I don't know exactly where the laughs are. I've written jokes, but they might not get laughs. That's the most disheartening thing. Going back to what you said earlier, it is pretty hard. Because as a magician, if I don't laugh every 10 minutes, it's fine. If not 10 minutes, but every 10 seconds or whatever, that's fine. But if you're doing some comedy stuff, you kind of feel like you're not doing good if they're not laughing.
You lose them.
Yeah. After 3 minutes of no laughs, you feel like it's too late. You can't get them to laugh now. And sometimes that's true. So obviously you have to be able to forgive yourself and just realize that shit's going to happen. You just have to kind of take one for the team. That's why in the comedy world, a lot of times the opening person is called the bullet. It just sometimes takes a couple minutes for everybody to settle down and focus on what's going on, that there's a show, And even in the best comedy clubs in the world, I've seen it happen. It takes time for people to just kind of get focused and settle down for the show. And that's the other thing. I think if you're trying a new routine out, you really are forced to be present. You can't phone it in. I think an audience is they're very sensitive to that. They can sense that, like a dog senses fear. They can tell if you're present in the moment. And so even if you're stumbling, they appreciate that you're present because you're acknowledging it and you're in the moment and you're trying. Whereas if you've done something a million times, they also are very sensitive to that. I can tell when an audience tells that performers phoning it in sometimes,
One thing that has challenged me recently is about how to spend my time. Sometimes I want to spend my time creating and coming up with tricks, and sometimes I'm like, oh, I got to book shows, and I know that you do many things. You lecture, you perform, and you create quite a bit. How do you spend your time? What's a day or what's a week for you? I know they're probably a little bit different. Obviously, they're all different, but can you spend 19 hours straight working on a trick and not feel like you didn't do anything for your business or something like that? Help me understand how you spend your time.
Well, the bad news is I haven't figured it out either, brother.
Oh, great.
I still struggle with it daily, but I feel like the fact that I know that it's a struggle is part of the battle. The fact that I'm even aware, the fact that I have to be more mindful of it. So I think that's part of it, is just being present with it. I've never once felt like I shouldn't have spent so much time, working on that idea. I really have never thought that. I've never have. I mean, there's definitely times where I'm like, well, that was a lot of time wasted for nothing, but I always learned something from it, even if it's just the patience of sitting with the idea. Maybe that's what you needed to learn. But yeah, there's always things to be learned along the way. So I've never regretted spending time on ideas. There's definitely times where I was like, wow, I spent $500 on junk and nothing came of it. I'd buying all these props, gluing all this stuff together and, waiting for things to dry. But I think that's a lot of fun in making stuff too. And I'm not super crafty. I love to make my own gimmicks and things like that, but it's not a natural ability that came to me in any way. I'm not very mechanically inclined or anything like that. So a lot of times I'm just going to my dad and be like, make this, do this.
Right. Like brute force building stuff.
Yeah, and that's, sometimes that's where some of the actual ideas come from, because I made something so crudely that it actually created an effect from it. I don't have a good example that comes to mind, but like happy accidents is basically what I'm saying, because I don't have, an engineering degree. I'm just like taping things together and things like that.
Right.
Sometimes the low tech stuff wins because it doesn't need to be battery operated or whatever, like the most recent thing I came up with is a perfect example. Well, not the most recent, but one of them is this Super Ball trick where you take a coin and then you shake it. My son had a Super Ball and I was just kind of playing around with it. Just like the things that magicians do where we're not really paying attention to ourselves, but we're just like doing sleights with little objects just to keep our hands busy. So I was just like, doing false transfers and things with this little ball. And then I was like, what? This is like the exact same size as a quarter. Like exactly. So, I'm just like one thing led to another. I'm like cutting this ball up and then, my son's like, Dad, where'd my ball go? I'm like, check out this coin. The bad news is your ball's gone. The good news is I just ordered 5,000 more. So it's going to work out. Everything's going to work out.
That's awesome. Yeah. You're going to get it back with interest.
That's like a perfect example of, I think when people see that trick, they think it's like way more high tech than what it is. It's just literally a ball and a coin that I like molded together. When I did it, I was like, oh my God, that looks way better than I thought. And then when I show it to people, they're like, dude, how are you doing that? I'm like, I'm just turning this.
Right.
But it's like, even when you teach it, it like looks magical. And like, that's a perfect example of like something that, at first I'm like, no, that's probably stupid. I can't tell you how many times, like some of my best, the trick that got me the most notoriety when I first started publishing things was the moving tan line where you take your watch off and like move your tan. And I thought about that for years thinking that's stupid until I finally was just like, I'll just go to the tanning booth and just set it up and see what happens. And then it was like David Copperfield's calling me wanting to buy it. And like Marco Tempest does it on TV and Chris Korn does it on TV. And
but the thing is like, it is stupid, but that's what makes it so great. Like,
yeah. It was, I didn't think it was stupid as much as I thought I thought people would just think it's a joke.
Right.
I mean, like, I'm like, but when I did it, like, and people reacted to it like I was God, and it was funny because the first time I ever did it for people was, there used to be this, actually, I think it's still around, the Second Deal was like a group of card guys, and they have like a online forum and all this stuff, but this was back in the beginning days of the internet.
When people actually used online forums.
Yeah, like late 90s. So to make a long story short, like I'm hardcore in with this guy of like the Second Deal, and they had like this convention. So this is like my first like magic convention. So I go there and like all these card guys and like show them, I'm moving my tan line and they're like, what the fuck? Because I wrote, awesome. And of course that was the first time I had ever seen anybody do card flourishes, because that was the first time I had seen Dan and Dave Buck were there. And that was also the first time I think anybody else had ever seen them. So it was like this really weird weekend of just craziness. So imagine there's like 100 super hardcore card guys staying at the same hotel as Juvenile, Cash Money Millionaires, and some other like super huge rapper. And they walk into the lobby and they see all these guys doing magic, and like the two worlds collide, and it was the most amazing thing you'd ever seen. It was like this entourage of hip hop stars, and of course they're going nuts and they're running around screaming and yelling. It was amazing. And there's like Don England was still alive. He's busting out card magic for them. It was awesome.
One thing that's always excited me about some of your magic is that you create with oftentimes unique props, things that are not so obvious or basic. Often you see the repertoire of creations of a magician to be 9 different ways to collect the aces all on a table or something to that nature. And I think you do stuff with cards and coins, but like you said, tan lines and super balls and milk pitchers and just like loads of different unique objects. Is that by design? Is that more like what you said before, where, it's a ball, your kid's playing with a ball and you start playing with it and that's where it comes from? Or do you reach outside into different places and different pockets to brainstorm and get ideas?
It usually just comes from playing. I just love to play with stuff. When I was younger, my process was often just, wouldn't it be cool if ... So, I still do sometimes, just kind of sit back and be like, wouldn't it be cool if I could put this inside this? And then it's like, okay, how do we do that? It's almost not even important what the method is, as long as you can find one. Just the effect, and the method is there's a string or there's a piece of something sticky or whatever, whatever. I don't care what it is, But sometimes we get caught up in the actual method, and we get, you know, and I'm just as guilty as that as well. Like, I think sometimes I wish I could just show people how the trick worked, because that would be more impressive. And there's certain tricks that are like that, like some of Tommy Wonder's things come to mind. It's just like, wow, the method is just more impressive than the actual trick. So I think that's even more true today, because magic has become a very marketable thing, and you can come out with a trick, you can think of something, and by the end of the day, you can have a, you know, be a product. And there's, you know, obviously good things to that and bad things to that.
You know, you mentioned earlier about, as a kid, getting lost in the research, and we were talking about creativity, and I'm wondering if you still do that, how you still do that, and how, you know, whether you feel like, we were talking about YouTube a little bit, whether you feel like that's a good thing, you know, that you can dig into the research of YouTube videos and resources like that, or if, you know, you like the whole digging through library, gathering old books, things of that nature. How does research look to you in 2020?
I use everything I can. I get that there's guys that are like, oh, you know, YouTube is bad for magic. I get it. I get where they're coming from, but I guess the way I feel about it is the way I feel like some people thought about like cell phones, like, oh, I'm never getting a cell phone, or computers. Oh, I'm never getting a computer. Well, that's fine, but you're gonna not be able to be part of this journey that the world is now in. So now this is the world now. You can't fight it. You can't fight YouTube. It's gonna be here. I've definitely found some cool things by searching YouTube when I've done research, you know, clips of things that helped me figure things out, or, you know, every once in a while you'll stumble upon an old, like, black and white clip of some amazing magic that somebody uploads, and thank God that there's guys that do that stuff, you know. So yeah, any means necessary, you know, calling people, going to libraries and looking up old records. You really forget that there's like usually people at your local library that are like just waiting for you to ask questions like that. You know, they've got like all this microfiche and like hundreds of years of stuff that you can look through. If you're really wanting to do research, it's amazing. Like, you can find out not only like where the tricks came from, but like where their children were born. You know what I mean? You can find out a staggering amount of information. So yeah, everything, man. I've got my own library. I've got thousands of books. I probably have way too many. That's my only weakness in life, is just I buy too many books. So I've got my own collection. I've got other guys that I know have amazing collections. I use Alexander probably every day. And then of course there's always like emails to Stephen Minch or phone calls to Max Maven, you know, things like that.
You say you use, you know, Alexander every day. Like, every day you're creating magic, or every day you're puzzling over stuff, or do you have notebooks? Do you have like help me understand what this creative process is like for you today?
Yeah, Alexander is really cool in that you're able to store stuff on there. Like, I'll just create files. Like, I'll create like a match file and a coin file and like, you know, a card forces file and blah, blah, blah. So it's pretty neat in that respect. But there's also kind of, like I mentioned before, like this cross-reference thing that starts to happen where I'm really lucky. I have a pretty good memory too. I can remember pretty much everything I've ever read. So I can't like recite page numbers and stuff like that, but I just have a pretty good memory. So by doing constant research and having read so many books, I have just like this, anybody has an idea like, oh, that'd be cool if you could do a thing with like a silk necktie and a sock. I'm like, oh, well, there's this one sock fit that Michael Weber had. And
Right.
So I can, that's not necessarily being creative, but it's going to help you be creative if you have more options. And I've always loved just write everything down, man. There's no stupid ideas. The stupid idea is the one you probably didn't write down because you were stupid to not write it down, you know? Like I talked about earlier with the talent thing, I thought about it for years and I just told myself it wasn't good. You know, I was my own worst enemy. I should have just done it, you know, years ago and then it would have been over with. And I still do that. There's still ideas that I've got in my notebooks and things like that. And it's not necessarily, I don't think they're good, but I just don't go to the store and buy the props and make it. It's just like one sentence thing that I wrote. And there's so many things that will influence me besides magic too. I love, you know, all kinds of entertainment. I'll go see anything live, whether it's poetry or juggling or anything. I just love live performance. I love live music. I feel like sometimes you can be really inspired by a musician too and how they perform and how they work a crowd. I remember getting dragged to a country show because I'm not a big country fan. And I was just so pissed off that I had to go to this show. And the only reason was because I liked the girl. But I remember being blown away because I didn't like the music, but he was such a good showman and he was so funny in between songs. I fell in love with the guy. And it was a great learning moment. And that, man, it just doesn't matter. If you can connect with that audience, it doesn't matter what you do as long as they like you. Because I didn't like that guy's music at all. But by the end of the night, I was ready to buy his album just because I thought he was so cool. He was almost like a comedian. And the reason why is because he had been doing that for 15 years. If you're in front of an audience for 15 years, you can't have dead time between your songs. You're going to fill them up with things that are entertaining. And I remember Daryl saying something along those lines. He was saying how he was excited to go see Madonna. And people started giving him shit, and they're like, why are you going to go see Madonna? And he's like, you don't think that the number one entertainer in the world that's selling more tickets than anybody in the world, you don't think you could learn something from that performance? And I was like, wow, man. It just really opened my mind. I was like, wow, good point, Daryl.
I know you're quite into live entertainment. What kind of live entertainment do you go that really opens your eyes to magic, or you don't really think about it like that? You kind of just go enjoy entertainment for entertainment's sake, enjoy magic for magic's sake, and let them mix in your subconscious.
Reminds me of a quote. I think it's Carl Mooney. He said, if you want to be inspired to entertain, go be entertained. Basically, if there's nothing more inspiring than just being very entertained by something. You know, seeing an amazing comedian will make you want to be funnier. Seeing an amazing magician will make you want to work harder or practice your skills more, you know. And I think that that's part of it too, is just the being inspired by seeing someone's talent. You know, it doesn't really matter what it is. But I think there's so much of a crossover with so many different arts. Like the idea of a comedy magician is kind of, you know, oxymoron, because I think funny is funny. Like they don't say, oh, he's a comedy musician, you know. He's just funny, you know. He's not like a comedy actor. He's just a funny actor, you know. Like I think we can get really caught up in these labels.
And I think, you know, part of the thing that's sticking out to me is that, like, you know, the finer details of what you do are just that, details. And like they matter and they're important. But if you like it to be really funny with a little bit of magic, or really magic, a little bit of funny, or really, like, each thing is unique, and whatever the thing that excites you, right? Like whatever the thing that gets you excited to create, to showcase, to work on, like.
You probably already instinctually know what that is for you. Maybe you love movies, or you love comic books, or you love whatever you love can cross over into magic really easily. It doesn't take much creativity. I've always been a drummer my whole life. I love to play the drums. So that's kind of been like always one of my things. I have never been able to combine the two, but I'm always thinking about it. And I know one day it'll just hit me and I'll be like, oh, that's it, you know? And I just think that if I do that, you know, it would be so cool to have, like, wouldn't it be cool to have like a magic drumming magician? You have never seen anything like that. So there's room for all that stuff. There's no wrong answer. You know, magic doesn't have to just be funny. Magic can be combined with tractor pulling if you wanted to. You know, I think that the guys that do combine the two are the guys that kind of oftentimes like stick out in the field. Like I think they often usually become the most entertaining too. Like I can sit and watch guys like Williamson or Jeff Hobson do anything. They just figured it out, you know. I've seen it compared to other stuff too. People are always like, oh, you know, like you can't follow this or you can't follow that, but you'd be surprised how amazingly impactful that good, strong comedy magic can be. It doesn't have to be comedy magic, just good, strong, you know,
entertainment.
Yeah, you can literally, a guy can just walk out on stage with a deck of cards and a good amount of wit, and that dude can follow the Beatles if he's good. You know, it's just people, they sell themselves short with what it can achieve. I've seen such powerful entertainers. I've been really lucky to travel the world and be able to go to a lot of conventions, and I see a lot of live performances and see some of the best performers like, you know, Johnny Thompson, David Burleson, all these great people. You can kind of see why they're great. You know, they're just likable and they're entertaining.
You know, I think that's a big take home for me from this, is that the entertainment is the key. Like that skill of being able to know that just give me a room, you know, like give me the people and I will entertain them. Like if I've got my cards, great. If I also have my this and this and this, also great. But if I don't, you know, I've been training my whole life for this moment, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I also think it's important to never judge yourself. I can't tell you how hard it was for me to kind of like force myself to get on stage, because I was not the guy that wanted to be on stage. Like I actually had trouble with it. It would give me anxiety. One of the biggest things that helped me was I took the Dale Carnegie course, which is almost kind of cliche, but it was really helpful. It didn't even really matter what they taught you in the class, because it's more about like, this is how to remember people's names. This is how to get, you know, ask people questions if you want to get a good conversation. But more importantly, you just had to stand up in front of the class every single time. And forcing myself to do that, I quickly realized that, man, there's nothing to worry about. The worst that's going to happen is that you'll say something that you didn't mean to say, or you'll say something stupid, or you'll flub a word. But None of those people in that class care. In fact, they are on your side. They want you to stay good. And if you say something bad, they have empathy for you. They're all your friends. And the other thing is, like, there's never enough people in any crowd to ruin your career. I remember seeing a comedian say that. He actually was like, he was getting heckled, and he was like, screw you guys. There's not enough of you here to matter to my career. And that's so right. Like, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. Even if you crash and burn, every prop breaks, every trick screws up, there's not enough people to remember. And I always tell people, like, do you know who won American Idol last year? And 99% of people will say no. Imagine, like, they won millions of dollars. They were the number one, and you don't even remember it. So if you fuck up, they're certainly not going to remember that.
Or someone said to me, like, that guy who constantly bothers you about the mistake you made 10 years ago? No, that's because they don't exist.
Exactly. We beat ourselves up so much. So if you get nervous about performing, or if you're like, I can never do this, that was me, man. Don't worry about it. Just keep doing it. And eventually it'll just be like, I still to this day get nervous. It's just a human thing. You can't, if you don't have feelings, maybe it just means you care. Like, if you don't care about the show, then you're not going to get nervous, because you're like, I just want to get my check and go home, get back to my bottle of vodka, or whatever your problem is. If you actually care, you're going to have a little bit of nerves, but that's just preparing yourself for the performance. And more often than not, it's just excitement and not nerves. But I think that sometimes I look back and I think maybe these are good things. Maybe even if it's a really, oh man, I'm going to shit my pants. There's so many people out there. This is a big crowd. This is a big venue. This is a lot of money, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes that's good to feel that, because you'll look back and you'll be like, oh man, I was so nervous for that, but I kicked ass and everything was fine. It's good to have those feelings. Yeah, you got to embrace those feelings and just really feel them and live with them. You can't fight them. And I feel like I've grown so much. I feel like there's probably a lot of people that, if they were to see my show, they would just be blown away, because they're like, that was the kid I went to school with. He didn't even talk. He didn't even say anything. And there's room for that for everybody. And I mean, if you want to be a quiet, introspective person, that's cool too. That can be really funny and that can be really marketable as well.
I think anybody listening has some bits and some pieces to help them try more, be a little more creative, and also get up on that stage and have fun, because it's an absolute blast.
Well, luckily for us, it's magic and comedy have never, ever been more popular. You know what I mean? They're the most popular they've ever been. There's open mics everywhere. Throw a rock, you're going to hit an open mic, And most of them are more than happy to get someone that will do something other than just comedy, because it's different. So they're like, yeah, dude, we'll for sure have you. And the other thing is, you've got an edge over them, because you can do things, you can make them laugh and you can fool them. So I think a lot of times people forget that the comedians will all look at it as a crutch, but they'll also be jealous when you get more of a reaction. And I dealt with that a lot. There's always going to be these comedians that, they're like, oh, you're the prop guy, or you're a prop comic. I've even had, like, the waitresses at the comedy club be like, oh, you're the prop comedian? I'm like, well, that's kind of a derogatory term, but yeah, that's me. But I mean, Carrot Top, he kills, man. He makes me cry laughing, and there's a lot of comedians that wish they could make his money,
Yeah, Amazing Jonathan, said the same thing. He said, kind of not a prop comedian, but I kind of am a prop comedian.
The problem is there's a lot of purist comedians that will look down at you if you touch anything. They're like, oh, you're just, it's just a crutch. You just hold up that thing, and then they laugh at that thing because you got that prop, And the reality is that it's just a different beast. They're not the same at all. So don't judge them just because they're not the same,
And with that, we are coming towards the end of the episode, and we have a bunch of wrap-up questions for each guest at the end of the episode. So the first is the endless chain. So in order to keep the podcast going on for eternity, each guest is asked to recommend another guest that they think would be lovely on the show. So who do you think would be fantastic on this show? With the caveat that you have to be able to put us in contact. You can't just say David Copperfield.
Well, let me think for a second. Have you had Eric Buss?
No.
Get Eric Buss. He's great to talk to.
That's great. Yeah. That's an awesome one. The next thing is about modern magic. So in this 2020 world of magic, there's a lot of things going on that we have never seen in the past, in the last 1, 2, 5, 10 years, Magic has changed greatly. What's something that you like about the world of Magic right now, and something that you don't like about the world of Magic right now?
I love that there's more people than just dudes doing it. I love that there's like this world of women and transgender people and just every walk of life that are, kind of embracing it. And I also love the fact that you can kind of be a part of it, because the reality is those people have always been around, but we weren't aware of them because we didn't have Instagram and Twitter and all these things. So I think that's really cool. It's a really cool part of technology. And also, like, we got these struggling Magic clubs everywhere around the world, because of, obvious reasons. There's the age gap. There's the fact that the way it's run. There's the fact that, there's a lot of factors. But at the same time, when I'm traveling around doing lecture tours, if I post something on Instagram or Twitter, it's really cool to have like this kid show up that was like, hey, I didn't know anything about, there's a Magic club here, but I saw your post on Twitter, so I just showed up here. And now the kid's plugged in because the local guys meet with them, and then they all get along, and then he starts going to the club. So that's a really cool thing. We can connect with each other faster and quicker and more, efficiently.
What's something that you don't like about the modern world of Magic?
I think that people can kind of shit on each other too much, but that's just true with any walk of life. People get bullied about certain things. And then also people can kind of go overboard. Like, I think one of the good examples was the recent thing with the illusionist fuck you thing. Do you know how many tricks of mine I've gotten stolen and didn't get turned into an internet fight? And that cost me much more money than those guys. It's like, we get it, but like, this happens daily. You have to be able to articulate your argument. And really, I'm of the firm believer that whoever publishes first wins. I don't care if you thought about it 30 years ago. If you didn't write it down, you didn't tell anybody, I don't care if you just thought about it. You have to publish it. So if we go back and we find out that, Jerry Sadowitz did it in the crimp in the 80s, ding, 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 we have a winner. So that's sorry, man. Like, I get that you thought of it, but you got to write shit down, bro. That's how the world works.
I love that. I think kind of stop with the animosity or the fighting, or, there's a lot of
yeah, because
stuff.
we're all playing in the same sandbox. It's just like comedy. Of course, they're all going to have similar jokes about riding airplanes and taking a shit and things like that. It's when somebody goes out of their way and specifically copies something, verbatim, that you start to go, oh, okay, well, that's not right,
The last is the take-home point. So people have been listening to us talk about Magic for over an hour now, and loads of different aspects of Magic. If people think back to this episode and they take home even just one thing, what would you hope that thing to be?
That there's no wrong answer. Whatever you want Magic to be for you, that's what it can be. If you want it to just be a hobby, then that's fine. If you want it to be your life, then that's something that you can achieve. You can do anything you want as long as you just believe it. Because I certainly would never, ever believe that I would be telling people on a podcast things about Magic when I was 14 years old. This has been a dream. I feel like I've won the lotto. It's like, if you can dream it, you can achieve it. It's a cliche thing to say. I mean, there's obviously limitations. I'm not going to be able to fly. But I still think if I put my mind to it, I could sprout wings out of my butt.
Well, I'm gonna keep trying with you. That sounds like fun.
There's a takeaway.
I love it. And the last thing is plugs. You have released so much Magic in so many places in the world. Where can people find you, and where can people find your Magic?
Well, thanks, man. The easiest thing is just go to kranzomagic.com. Most of my stuff is available at most Magic shops. So if you just want to go to your local dealer, most of that stuff is stocked. But there are a few things that are exclusives that are only available through me, like my most recent Easy Card Magic book, plug. But yeah, just kranzomagic.com. And if anybody is listening and wants to get a discount, I'll actually open this up for the next couple of weeks. Just use code THANKS, capital T, capital H, capital A, capital N, as in Nancy, capital K, capital S, just the word thanks at checkout, and it'll give you 20% off your order.
Amazing. And I think with that is a perfect way to say thanks thank you, Nate, for a lovely episode and lots of great lessons in the world of magic. And I think
thanks
a
to you,
reminder...
bro. I appreciate the opportunity, and I hadn't talked to you in a while, so it was good to catch up. Actually, we didn't catch up at all. It was all about me, so it was really one-sided. I'll have to call you back.
Well, thank you so much. An absolute pleasure. And of course, a big thank you to everybody at home who joined us, learned a little bit about creativity, about magic, about comedy. And we will see you all next Thursday.
Thanks for having me.
Well, there you have it. I hope you liked the episode, and I hope, of course, that you learned something. Not only how to be creative, not only how to be funny, but how to protect yourself against angry child pirate riots. Once again, if you liked the episode, please spread the word, share it, tell a friend. It means the world, and it's the only way that this thing gets around. And next episode is the 200th episode, and boy, is it a special one. I'll see you Thursday.